Elaine Drysdale, médica canadiana, professora do Departamento de Psiquiatria da British Columbia University, integrou o quadro de formadores durante o VII Congresso de Medicina e Espiritualidade, organizado pela AME Norte, que decorreu em 23 e 24 de novembro de 2019 em Matosinhos. O certame integrou um seminário para profissionais de saúde sobre espiritualidade e investigação científica, onde a Dr.ª Elaine Drysdale falou sobre experiências de quase-morte na prática clínica, bem como sobre a interface entre a psiquiatria e a espiritualidade. No dia seguinte, aceitou falar conosco.
We are here in the Medical Congress of Medicine and Spirituality, and we wanted to ask you some questions. First, what is the near-death experience that you talk so much about it?
Well, the near-death experience is a state of altered consciousness that occurs when people have a cardiac arrest, or they're very close to death, or in an extreme life-threatening situation, such as an impending car crash. But usually we think of the experience as it occurs with a cardiac arrest. And it's not just being in a situation of a life-threatening illness, but it's actually an altered state of consciousness that occurs. And it occurs when you would think that there would be no consciousness. The person may look comatose or may be pronounced clinically dead, and yet they are revived, and they describe an incredible state of altered consciousness and awareness, which is very amazing.
Does these cases appear to you in your clinical practice?
Well, these occurrences of near-death experiences are very common. They occur in 5% of the population, which is astounding because people don't talk about them very openly, and they feel that it's a very private matter. They don't want to be ridiculed or made to feel foolish, but they are so common. They also occur in 18% of resuscitated cardiac patients. So people have had these experiences that we don't always realize, and it's amazing that family, friends, other members around us may have had them. So of course, I think many of my patients have had them, but they're probably private about them. But when I ask specifically, it's very interesting that a number of people have had various aspects of the near-death experience, whether it's from an awareness of during a surgical procedure when they had general anesthesia, or whether they were able to float out of their bodies and perceive conversations in other parts of the building, or be aware of floating down a tunnel. So there are many aspects that people can have. They might not have a full-blown phenomena, but when I ask, I have had a number of patients who have had these experiences.
You being aware of this process changes in your clinical practice with your patients?
Oh my goodness. I think it has had a profound effect on my clinical practice, learning about near-death experiences. For one thing, I'm able to recognize when people have had a near-death experience and be very reassuring to them or validate their experience so that they don't feel that it's an object of ridicule. I don't want to demean their experience or minimize it. And I don't want to just explain it off as a mere infection or hypoxia. So number one, validating an experience that a person has had. But beyond that, I know that 95% of the population has not had such an experience, and many people are very frightened of dying. So I'm able to talk about these experiences that people have had to people who are afraid of dying. And I will often say to them, have you ever heard of someone who's had a near-death experience, or what that's about? Well, it's what people experience when they come as close as you can get to dying and yet still come back and talk about it. And what they tell us is that the actual process of dying is a very peaceful one, no matter what it looks like on the outside. And that beyond that, there are spiritual implications that you may want to believe or not. But I think it is important to recognize the phenomenon and of the near-death experience clinically for many reasons.
So you're a psychiatry and you contact a lot with suicide. Does it have any implications, these near-death experiences in these cases?
I think it can be a profoundly important role of teaching about near-death experiences to people who are suicidal or who have lack of sense of purpose or meaning in their lives. What I will sometimes say to a patient who is in the emergency or elsewhere who is suicidal, have you ever heard of a near-death experience? And it's an experience that people can have sometimes when they've come very close to death or had a cardiac arrest, and they still come back and talk to us about it. And what we know from those experiences is that there seems to be a sense of being loved in the universe, but most importantly at this point is that your life has a meaning, it has a purpose, you are here for a reason, and that you are loved, and that there is a spiritual realm, but at the same time we're not supposed to leave it early, we're not supposed to exit early from this life, because from the stories that I've heard about people who've tried to commit suicide and come back and talked about it, that if they succeeded in their suicide, that there is concern that they would have to go through all the pain that they've experienced in this life again and then go from there forward. So as one person said, you're not benefiting by leaving this life early. It's better to stick with things and tough it out and carry on forward and complete it. It sounds to me like trying to commit suicide would be like dropping out of a high school year in the middle of it, for example, in the spring term of grade 10, and then having to go back and start from the very beginning of the semester and go forward. So I really stress that we're not supposed to leave it early. So what is the purpose in your life? What would give you meaning? What would give you fulfillment? Of course, that's not the only treatment I would do for someone who's suicidal, and they might require hospitalization and medication and further concerns for their safety. So I'm not saying that that's the only thing I do, but I think it's important to stress to people that they are cared about and they are loved in the universe and by others, and that they are here for a reason.
Effects in their lives.
Oh my goodness, the effects are profound. People who've had near-death experience report that if they were afraid of dying, they are no longer afraid of dying. They know that it's peaceful, and they know that there is another whole realm beyond. They tend to become more spiritual. If they were agnostic or atheist before, they tend to have more faith after this, or a sense of being loved, that there is a whole awareness, there is a spiritual realm. People have a sense of gratitude for the life that they have. They tend to be more wanting to live this life fully before they go on to the next realm. But there's a greater appreciation of their sense of purpose. They often feel a sense of awe and amazement at the whole world that is unseen, that we don't know about, and that awaits us when we do pass on at some point and leave this mortal coil, as the poets have said. So the effects of a near-death experience are really very profound. It's very different, for example, from the effects of a delirious experience, where people just feel grateful that they are no longer sick and no longer in that state of feeling muddled. A near-death experience is very different, and people are profoundly affected. Beyond that, there are some other interesting things. Sometimes people feel that they find that their electromagnetic energy is a little bit different. Watches don't work as well. Some interesting things that have been described by Dr. Melvin Morse in Transformed by the Light about the effect of near-death experiences on people who had them as children.
what can you give us from the knowing him?
Well, Dr. Raymond Moody is a fascinating man, a very wonderful and kind man. He had a PhD in philosophy and then went to medical school and heard about 2 accounts of near-death experiences from 2 individuals, and he thought, I can't be the only person to hear of this. There can't just be 2 in the world. So he went to cardiology units and interviewed people who'd had cardiac arrests, and he interviewed relatives of people who'd died and people who'd come very close to death. And so he found that they often talked about floating out of their body at the time that they were pronounced dead, and then being able to see things perhaps in other cities or other parts of the world. And Dr. Jung had described his episode of floating up and seeing the entire globe bathed in a blue light. So people float up, they go down a tunnel and see a being of light at the end of it. Oftentimes they're met with deceased relatives or friends who are there to celebrate their arrival on the other side, to welcome them, to greet them. And then oftentimes people have a life review where they see their entire life from the time they were born, every instance until the time that they've had this experience. And they see these events unfold, but they also see the effects that these events, their behavior has had on others. If they were rude to somebody, they see the other person feeling, or they feel the other person feeling hurt. So it was Dr. Raymond Moody who was able to talk to people and be aware of this whole pattern that exists with a near-death experience. So he wrote this book in 1975, elucidating and labeling these aspects of the experience. And the book became a world bestseller. It has sold over 30 million copies. It's been translated into many languages, and it's had an effect worldwide because the people began to talk about it, then it began to come in movies. But my experience with Dr. Raymond Moody was as a medical student, and I phoned him up, and someone said, oh, he's very gracious, just phone him up and talk to him. And I did that, and he was just so welcoming of questions. And I think his manner has been a wonderful asset for the field, because not only has he labeled these phenomena, but he has encouraged people to talk about it. And because he's so down to earth and has such a wonderful sense of humor, then people feel more comfortable in talking about it. So I think his wonderful personality has had a dramatic effect too on the field.
So we are very pleased to have you here. How do you felt here in our Congress of Medicine and Spirituality?
Well, I think that this Congress is wonderful. I think it's having a conference that addresses both medical aspects and spirituality is really a step forward, and it indicates to professionals in the healthcare field that this should be something we should be looking at, the spiritual aspects of illness. And it also is a message to the general public that this is important, and that physicians, other healthcare providers should be acknowledging the spiritual aspects. It's been a profound experience. There are many fascinating speakers, and I've enjoyed your own presentations and your posters. I've been learning, and I find that this whole conference has been very warm and welcoming. Yeah, the Spiritist community is a very wonderfully warm and gracious community. So I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to Dr. Sonia Doi, who is president of the International Medical Spiritist Association, and she's done a wonderful job in organizing programs and in providing wonderful opportunities for people to learn.